Hello and welcome back to the cellblock Scorch. It's Octo again. You just getting a lot of me all of a sudden. And this week is 243B. The prompt for this week was given by Bones, and the prompt was, I don't expect you to ever feel bad about killing me, but I will make you regret it. Which is inherently angsty, so of course I had to write something kind of horrifying about it. And this thing that I wrote actually is part of a wider universe. I've read stuff for it before. It's with Janie. If you've listened to anything else in this podcast, you've known that he's popped up a couple of times. And in this one, you're going to actually kind of figure out what his problem is, which will be thrilling for everybody, I'm sure. And I will read this to you, and then, hopefully, I will explain to you some things that you have heard. The title of this Scorch is Rueing the Day. There were a lot of things in his life that Jenny had handled badly. So many, in fact, that they went into separate categories. Should regret, refusing to regret, and not thinking about. Note the lack of actual regretting. He worked very hard at that, not regretting, and he wasn't about to start now. Now, the should regret category was a little slim. Things that he logically knew weren't great, but couldn't find the energy to care about. His birth, for example. Or perhaps the way his last encounter with his brother went. That had gone about as smoothly as a sandpaper loofah. Not much else, though. Refusing to regret took a bit more effort, but was generally worth it in the end. He refused to regret the fact that Ralph thought he was an unhinged murderer, for example. Nothing he could really do about that. See, not thinking about. Now, was there? He also refused to regret smashing Loki's extensive wine collection a week ago. It had been the only way to stall Bacchus long enough for them to slip away, and she knew it. She shouldn't have been stockpiling wine in the first place. They were in a crisis. The world's longest, slowest moving crisis. A millennium in the making, in fact. The real problem came when something he'd squirreled away in the not thinking about category rudely started interacting with him in real life. Turns out, it was very hard not to think about something when it was staring you dead in the eye and refusing to budge out of the way, specifically to spite you. Standing between Loki, Eunomia, and Jenny, and the entrance to the underworld, where they needed to be exactly right at this moment, was a balding, stuffy-looking man in a three-piece suit. He didn't even have any weapons, just a stalwart glower on his jowly face and a weeping wound soaking the fabric around his heart. Jenny couldn't move. Loki turned with a smirk to scoff at the newest threat, but her eyes widened dramatically at whatever she saw on his face. Eunomia glanced sharply at his petrified state and took 2 quick steps backward. She quietly asked, "What's wrong?" Jenny didn't answer, too busy cursing his luck. Of course, this would be the final hoorah to keep them out. Loki had pulled together enough power to execute the spell Nomi wrestled from the depths of some ancient library, and now it was going to be his fault that they couldn't make it in there. If they weren't trying to get into the House of Hades specifically, he could have saved them the effort. He had regular lunch dates with Hel at this point, but no! They had to be gunning for an afterlife none of them had a direct pipeline into. "Janie," Loki asked, now casting a calculating look at the man. "Who is that?" Janie, against his own will and better judgment, trilled a hysterical little laugh. That was the question, wasn't it? He didn't know the man's name. He was simply the man in the three-piece suit, had been for hundreds of years. He'd only ever seen him the once, and the memory was stretched and warped, nearly illegible. Were memories legible? Was that the correct term? "Genie!" Nomi hissed, dragging him back so they could both stand behind Loki, who had many, many knives at the ready and looked grimly prepared to use them on the man. "Genie, what's wrong?" He didn't know how to answer that because, as discussed earlier, he'd been not thinking about this man for a millennium. It was a hard habit to kick. When he tried to find the words, they skittered away like thousands of tiny spiders. When he tried to look at the man, his eyes slid right off his finely tailored jacket. Each thought involving him was dispatched with extreme prejudice, stabbed right through the chest. Maybe not the best imagery to use for this situation. When it became obvious that Loki was perilously close to committing a regrettable, fairly unnecessary act of extreme violence, as she was wont to do, Janie admitted, sheepish to the last, "I don't know. I don't expect you to ever feel bad about killing me," the man finally droned, apparently overwatching Janie gape like a fish. "I don't even think you're capable of such an emotion, rancid little creature that you are, but I will make you regret it." Loki, bless her, didn't stand down in the slightest, but Nomi shot Janie a concerned look. "Janie, what is he talking about?" I killed him once," Janie faintly replied. "Don't know why, though." "I've been specifically asked to guard this gate," the man continued, heedless of their conversation. "By Zeus himself. He pulled me out of purgatory for this, and he explained everything." Ginny watched him adjust his lapels and cuffs with a distant sort of horror, unable to do anything but shake his head at Nomi's confused stare. "You can't get through this gate without my say-so, and I will never give it to you, not even if you beg." No begging? That was a shame. Ginny, having exactly no pride in his entire body, was excellent at groveling. He was less excellent at dealing with vengeful spirits that personally hated him for an event that he had maybe 40% recall of. And that was a generous estimate. "We are trying to stop the apocalypse, you decrepit ashtray," Loki snapped. "Have this out on your own time." "This is my own time," the man gleefully said, a nasty grin creeping across his face. "If I keep you from getting in here, Zeus will have a word with the man upstairs and see if he can't get me upgraded to heaven." Nomi tried to jolt Janie from his semi-comatose horror with firm pats on his shoulder to no avail, then turned to the man. "Look, if you don't let us go by, everyone is going to die. Literally, everyone." The man looked pointedly down at himself and his mortal wound and his ghostliness, then back up at her. "How is that my problem anymore?" "It isn't. That cretin right there made sure of that. I'd never even met you before." Janie numbly watched the man jab an accusatory finger at him, and had to give him that one. Maybe if he could explain why he'd thrown a knife through his heart with pinpoint accuracy when they'd randomly crossed paths on the road, he'd be more amenable to help. Probably not. Something had cracked. The sky had begun collapsing in on itself the further down the road the man had walked, and it had hurt. Janie had been disoriented and confused by the whispering, getting louder and louder. It wouldn't stop, juggling his mental stability on the tips of his toes, and in that very moment he'd known the man in the three-piece suit around whom the very universe was crumbling with every step needed to stop that immediately. And so, Janie had stopped him. The universe had uncrumpled. He'd stopped feeling the jagged edges of reality sliding against his skin like an iron maiden snapping shut. The man had been dead by the time he'd realized he'd even thrown the knife. Instead of letting him go to jail for blatantly murdering some government official in the street in front of dozens of witnesses, Crow had flung him backwards into the past where he could live and die in peace. Not anyone's problem anymore. A perfect solution to assuage the guilty consciences that had caused the problem in the first place. Except Janie hadn't died. He'd kept living up until he caught back up with himself and all the things he was not thinking about. He supposed it was high time he started thinking about them. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a plane of existence on which to avoid his problems anymore. Kind of put things in perspective. I do, you know. Oh, that was his voice. He was speaking. Excellent. Jenny tried his best to fit himself back inside his brain. You what? The man spat, returning his gaze to Janie. Janie edged around Loki and Nomi, then turned, fully faced the man in the three-piece suit. I regret killing you, he said with his whole chest, the first regret he'd admitted to in centuries. It felt surprisingly nice to say it out loud. I regret that I don't remember why, or how, or even when I did it. I actually regret ever seeing you. The man gaped at him like he'd smacked him across the face with a fish. He wavered around the edges, and the gates behind him creaked open ever so slightly. Loki flashed by the man to brace her shoulder against the gates, keeping them from closing again. And Nomi scrambled to help her. Oh? Looked like he could lever open this man's single-minded vengeance streak with the weight of his own regrets. Excellent. He had so many, after all.
Hey guys, it's Bones with Judge Comments. I got submissions from both Octo and Cricket this week, and they were both very good and very upsetting. In the end, Octo's was just more the vibe I was looking for. Cricket wrote an interesting, upsetting piece about a politically driven personal betrayal, and it really came down to the tone in which the prompt was said. Cricket's was bittersweet. There's some hope in it, less of a curse and more of a dream, which is lovely, but not what I wanted. I wanted something bitter and twisted, and something that would make me wince every time I thought about it. And Octo did that for me, and made it even better than I hoped, because the murderer is someone I love. I love Janie. And the way this was written and presented with his usual frivolity and lighthearted thought processes is such like a horrible, beautiful juxtaposition. Like there's nothing better to me than a comic relief character whose past makes me hyperventilate. So I hope you all enjoyed that and that it will haunt you forever as it does me. So back to Octo for further comments.
And there you have it. This scene, which will hypothetically be a reveal of what the heck is wrong with Janie in the imaginary book that I will write for him one day. So, you may be asking yourself, what the heck is happening? And that's a fair question, because there's a lot of lore stacked up in the back of this story that I have not got into, because it wasn't the point of the story. The point of the story is that Janie is filled with many regrets. I'm making him, because that's what you do to your characters, right? You're like, you have one foible, and it's that you will never feel this feeling. And then you spend the whole story making them feel it until they deal with it. So, a little bit of lore to kind of understand what's happening. So Janie killed this man because the universe was about to end. He didn't know that's what it was, but that's why. So the way that this universe works, okay, it's kind of a tier system. The universe itself is sort of an entity. It's a great overarching thing that just, like, keeps existence happening, right? Call it life itself. And then there are people who are gods, of various religions or pantheons or everything. And they kind of supply the energy to the universe. And they get their energy from humans who worship them. So, in the beginning of time, when humans worshipped gods, the gods got their energy from the humans worshipping them. And then the universe had enough energy to keep running smoothly because the gods had enough energy to keep doing their jobs. As time moves along, though, what happens is that the humans eventually become, self-sufficient and start stepping in and doing the various gods' jobs instead. For example, Janie's brother Crow that he mentioned, who threw him back in time, is essentially the time police and is doing the job of various time gods because he's good at it and he has the magic to do it. But that means that the energy that would be otherwise funneled toward the god and therefore the universe doesn't get there anymore. So the universe is kind of breaking down. And this is normal. In this case, the universe is kind of a cyclical thing, which is kind of a setup that appears in several kinds of mythology, but like Norse mythology specifically, is the idea that history kind of just repeats itself on a grand scale. And that's what's happening here. The universe starts. It does all of its stuff. Eventually comes a point where it can't support itself because of how things are functioning anymore. And then it basically does a hard reset and restarts everything, which is the apocalypse. Now, usually this isn't a problem for people because when the apocalypse happens, everyone dies and gets recycled, essentially. But unfortunately for Janie, due to a series of unfortunate events, he can't die. He is physically incapable of it. And so he figured out what was happening. Well, he didn't really figure it out. He just figured out that this guy walking down the street was going to make the world collapse, because that's what was going to happen. This guy that he killed was actually one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, because it was apparently Christianity's turn at the apocalypse wheel in this current iteration of everything. Alright? And so, since Janie killed him, that took the apocalypse right off its hinges, and it wasn't happening anymore. And that is unfortunately why Janie killed that man, and he doesn't know this. He eventually figures it out. I will give him closure, I promise, but that's what's happening there. So the whole plot of this book, essentially, okay, is that Janie wants the apocalypse to not happen because he is very concerned about what would happen to him in the process. As you can imagine, he doesn't have high hopes for himself in that regard. So he figures out that the entire universe is crumbling in on itself and wants it to stop. So essentially, it's him running around trying to make that happen. He picks up Loki, who starts to help him out mostly because he's bored, but eventually gets invested. And then they pick up Eunomia, and due to a series of events that I will not go into, they figure out that someone's trying to trigger the apocalypse on purpose to kind of game the system. It's Zeus. Zeus sucks. Also, it's Hera. Hera is... You'll see. Anyway, a lot of people are trying to game the system now that they know it exists. But that's low-key what's happening here. Janie is just a little guy who has unfortunately become metatextual in his own universe and is suffering accordingly. I don't know why I enjoy characters like him, but I really do. I like characters who are somehow removed from the world that they're in, either like mentally or physically or something like that, and have to deal with it. Does this say something about me? Perhaps. Who's to say? All this to say that one day maybe I'll write a book. Maybe you can read it. Maybe then you will understand my unhinged magic and various other things, the system that I have attempted to explain to you here. Maybe not. But I hope you enjoyed my little snapshot into Janie's brain as he experiences 1 grain of character development. The next Scorch, the one that I judged, because I won this time, the prompt I gave for, if I can find the darn thing, 244B was Rhetoric about as profound as a nursery rhyme. And Styx won that one. So where this prompt came from, it's a little silly. So when I was in middle school, we had the regimented reading time, right after lunch or whatever. And I'd never bring a book, ever. Every time I would think about bringing a book, but I never did. So I ended up reading one of the 5, provided books in the classroom instead. And the 3 books that were, generally in there were, Fahrenheit 451, The Hunger Games, and this, the final book in the Gregor the Underland series, okay? I haven't read the first book in the series, but only the last one. I really enjoyed it, though. So, in Gregor the Underlander, there are these prophecies, alright? And through most of the books, from what I could gather, because I had not read the other 4, these prophecies had been making a whole bunch of crap go down. And then, during this book, they realized that these little nursery rhymes on the walls are actually more secret prophecies that prophesy this, horrible mouse genocide. It was exciting and scarring in equal measure. Children's books, man, they really go for your throat sometimes. But I thought that was really interesting and fun. So I was like, give me some rhetoric as profound as a nursery rhyme. Let's go. See what people do with this. And I was not disappointed, and hopefully you too will have a good time. I got a wide spread for that. I'll talk about it later when it's actually, about the episode. But that is all for me, folks. Thanks for listening to me talk about my little peoples, and keep that fire burning.
The Cellblock Scorch is a production of Stellacore, an independent group of nerds sharing their obsessions with the world. Links to all our projects, including Instagram, Tumblr, YouTube, Patreon, and Ko-Fi, can be found on our Linktree, posted in each episode description. Follow us on Tumblr or Instagram to see the prompt of the day before the episode drops, and a quote from each Scorch the day after. If you would like to support our creative endeavors, you can give a one-time tip to the Ko-Fi of the writer of your favorite Scorches, or check out our Patreon. There, you can access the Scorches and episode transcripts for free, or sign up for Spark level support for $5 a month to gain access to our embers as well.